My story is not quite ordinary. I will tell you how I first met my mother-in-law. My wife and I live in another city, and somehow we didn't have a chance to meet her relatives. The new year was approaching, and my wife suggested inviting her mother to visit. To be honest, I was not thrilled with the idea. I'm not a fan of receiving guests, doing all the fuss and running around shopping. But my wife insisted. She said it was time for us to get together, since we'd been married for a year and I'd never seen her mother. I really never had the opportunity to meet her. I was always busy with work and traveling, and it was hard to carve out any free time. I couldn't even remember the last time I took a vacation, so I agreed to celebrate New Year's Eve with my mother-in-law. My wife was delighted, clapping her hands and kissing me on both cheeks. If only she knew how this holiday would end. But we'll get to that later. I didn't think much about my mother-in-law at all. I only knew that she had been divorced for a long time. Her personal life did not interest me. With my wife, I had a great relationship. I had no complaints. She was a good housewife and everything was fine in the bedroom. My friends often envied me, saying I was lucky to have such a wonderful wife. If only they knew how lucky I would be to have a mother-in-law. But I won't get ahead of myself, all in good time. As the holiday approached, my wife was busy preparing for her mother's arrival. She mentioned that her mom didn't like to cook, and that they always had a housekeeper when she was growing up. I was a little surprised. I come from a simple family, no housekeepers, no luxuries. I was curious to know what kind of person my mother-in-law was, and before I could stop myself the paper from clutching in my hand, I began to read. As the holiday approached, I had almost forgotten about her. I didn't have time to help my wife with shopping or holiday preparations. My wife spent all day in the kitchen, striving to make everything perfect. She wanted to impress her mother and prove that her dishes were as good as the restaurants. We set the table, turned on the TV, and waited for her mother to arrive. My wife wanted this party to be for family only, no friends, no outsiders, to keep the atmosphere intimate. A couple hours before midnight, the doorbell rang. My wife ran to open it, and I stayed sitting in the chair, curiously waiting to see who was coming. When the door opened, I was stunned. In the hallway stood an absolutely gorgeous woman, wrapped in a luxurious coat down to her heels. She was no more than 50, and as soon as she took off her coat, I couldn't help but notice her tight evening gown that perfectly emphasized her figure. She was striking, and I was surprised myself at how attracted I was to her. Women her age don't usually take such good care of their appearance. She greeted us cheerfully and entered the room, her perfume filling the air as she passed. She sat down at the table. Her presence was both graceful and commanding. My wife and her mother immediately plunged into conversation, chatting like old friends, while I quietly sipped my drink. My mother-in-law occasionally cast sly, flirtatious glances in my direction, which my wife didn't seem to notice. She was simply enjoying her mother's presence. I soon learned that my mother-in-law was accustomed to impressing people and always sought to attract attention in a frivolous manner. The evening went on, and close to midnight, we all had a little too much to drink. Eventually, my wife went into the kitchen to clean up, leaving my mother-in-law and I alone in the living room. I stared at her, unable to look away. She must have sensed my gaze because she turned to me with a knowing smile. "Why are you looking at me like that, James?" she asked, her voice playful. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't deny that I felt an unexpected attraction to her. I never thought I could be interested in someone older, but there was something about her, the confidence, the elegance. Before I knew it, there was a palpable tension between us. It all happened so quickly. One moment we were just sitting there, and the next we were enveloped by something much stronger than each of us. Afterward, we both sat there in shock at what had just happened. My mother-in-law looked as stunned as I was, but there was a sense of satisfaction in her eyes. We awkwardly separated, each to our own room, trying not to wake my wife. I didn't even bother to take a shower, just plunged into bed at a breakneck speed of thought. The next morning we all gathered for breakfast pretending that nothing had happened. My mother-in-law was an expert at keeping up appearances, smiling and chatting with my wife as if everything was perfectly fine. My wife was in high spirits, completely unaware of the secret now being kept between her mother and me. We spent the rest of the day together, my wife enjoying her mother's presence while my mother-in-law and I carefully avoided each other's gaze. We watched movies and ate cake, and only occasionally did I catch a sly glance from my mother-in-law from across the room. It was enough to remind me that what happened wasn't a dream, but we both knew it was something that should never happen again. I decided to ask Sandra, who took me by the hand and led me around to our Tolteca. Who would have thought that New Year's Eve would end with such an unexpected twist? Life certainly has its surprises, and there was no way I could have foreseen this one